privileged to present my first guest of 2025, Kamaljit Lehal, a lawyer, an advocate, and someone that I'm privileged to call a friend. I present Kamaljit Lehal on Rachel Thexton Connects. Okay, so I'm very fortunate today. The first episode of 2025 on season 3 of the podcast, I'm honored to welcome a very intelligent, kind woman. Her name is Kamaljit Lehal, and she is founder of Lehal Law Corporation. She's also very much an advocate, very involved in her community. Thank you so much for being with us today, Kamaljit.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks.
Of course. So just a little bit of background for listeners. I know Kamaljit as she stepped down recently, correct, as the chair of the board for Options Community Services?
Yes.
And Options Community Services is a client of mine, one of my favorite clients, although I don't play favorites, but they just do such amazing work in our communities. They go over and above in what they do to support various causes within the greater Vancouver area. And Kamaljit led the board for several years, and prior to that, sat on the board. So that's how I came to know Kamaljit. But she has so many areas of expertise, and there's several topics in which I would love to talk about today. And I think that listeners will find this very, very timely and very insightful. So let's start, if it's okay with you, by asking you a little bit about your story. So I know that you're involved in the community as a strong voice and leader, as an advocate in several areas, but you're also a very experienced lawyer, specializing in immigration and other areas as well, but primarily immigration from what I understand. And you received your law degree in 1989 from UBC. But can we back up and can you tell us a bit about what growing up was like for you? And did you always know that you wanted to be a lawyer? Becoming a lawyer takes time, and it's a big deal. Is that something you always knew was in the future for you?
It's quite the journey.
Yes.
So my story, I guess, your question, did I always know? I think I kind of always did, but I think it was part of how I was raised. I was the only daughter, 2 brothers, and in a South Asian Punjabi Sikh family. And so a bit of a strict upbringing, being the only daughter, and I would challenge some of the rules and that I was put under, comparing myself to my brothers, and my parents would say, "Oh, you should just become a lawyer. You argue so much." And so I think a little seed got planted there, and I did argue, I did challenge, and it just became, I didn't think of any other careers. Like, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. And that's where it started from, I think, from my upbringing and from challenging the status quo of my parents and some of the rules. And, they came with their cultural, I guess, traditions and how do you raise a son? How do you raise a daughter? There were differences back then. It's changed a lot since then. But when they were growing up, it was even more stark differences. So they definitely wanted me to get educated. So that was very important to my mom, that all 3 of her children, regardless of whether they're son or daughter, that they all be educated, because she had wanted to become a nurse herself and was told, "Oh, once you get married and when you're in your in-laws' house, you can pursue your education." Well, that never happened. So it was her mission to make sure we all got educated, but there was still differences in how I felt I was treated for my brothers. So they used to push back.
So you've always had a very strong voice, even as a child.
Or a good stomping of the foot, right?
I still stomp my feet sometimes. So in your upbringing, are you first generation to be born in Canada, second, third generation?
I was born in London, England.
Oh, wow.
My parents were actually born in Nairobi, Kenya. My grandparents were born in the Punjab, India. So they immigrated to Nairobi, and my parents were born there. My parents immigrated to England, I think, in 1964. So I was born in England, and my dad came to Canada to visit my mom's brother, who was living in Canada, and really liked it here and decided to come back home and say, "We're moving to Canada." So that was under what was the old point system back then. And you got some points for having family here. And I guess your age, whatever the criteria were, we met it, and we immigrated here in 1975. My children, I have 4, are first generation Canadians.
Okay, and have you always been on the West Coast? Did you come straight to Surrey, to the Vancouver area?
British Columbia.
And you stayed here.
Stayed here, yes.
Excellent. So your focus on immigration law, this is, wow, what an area of law to pursue. And I say that, I mean, I know all areas of law are challenging in their own ways. There's a lot of emotion involved, some heavy elements, clearly. I suppose because I have my own personal experience with immigration, it hits home for me. You also work in other areas of the legal practice. Can you speak to that? And what has it been like for you working in law compared to how you thought or imagined it may be? What's the journey in the field been like for you, Kamaljeet?
I started out, so I articled at WorkSafe BC is what it's known as now. And then I went to a mid-sized firm and worked there. For about a year, I was actually let go of and replaced by a senior lawyer. And I was devastated at that point. What do I do? And my husband, and I think it's an innate characteristic of South Asian people, is like, just start your own business, start your own law firm. So here I was, probably must have been 26 or 27 years old at the time, hung up my own shingle, didn't know a thing about business because they don't teach you that in law school. It's not on the menu. It's about the theory and how to dissect a case, and then you get into the real world. You do have PLTC, so after you finish law school, there's a practicum course you take where you do some mock interviews. And as I recall, it was maybe like a week or two long, and that was it. There's not a single course about, well, how do you actually find clients? How do you retain them? How do you bill them? The business of law. So I had to learn as I went along, and it was, I think I still continue to learn because I went into it to becoming a lawyer. I didn't ask, what does a lawyer earn? Because I was going to be that, that I'm going to make a difference and I'm going to achieve justice and I'm going to make sure right? Really idealistic. And so no business sense, and started my own law firm, hired a few lawyers. And so I'm pretty junior in my 20s, and I've hired lawyers who I'm mentoring. It's always a blind leading the blind, actually, at that point. And then in 96 and 97, I had kids, my first two kids, back to back. And it just became overwhelming running a business because there's no mat leave. And I don't think there really is now for women in any profession if you're running your own business. So I'm like, well, the kids can't be returned. I got to let go of the lawyers. So I let go of all the lawyers, and I had about 3 or 4 at that time, and became a sole practitioner. And I'd call myself a general practitioner of law. Like I did, other than family law, I've done criminal, I've done civil, personal injury, I've done corporate, real estate, I've done it all. But I guess the one I really resonated with was immigration. And I've done that since I became a lawyer. It was just something where I felt I align with the work that's being done here and what's being achieved. It just made sense to me. So there's different sides to immigration. You can do business immigration, corporate immigration, and it wasn't the same feeling. That I'd like doing more of the humanitarian side, the refugee claims, and those sort of applications.
Okay, so I know, every client is different and there's a variety of types of cases that you would manage, but what would perhaps take us into the average day for you? Maybe one of your a client that you get more than another type. What would that look like, and what kind of, legal needs would they require from you?
I've kind of become known as the immigration lawyer who does family violence cases.
Okay.
So I get a lot of inquiries from, majority of mine, I have yet to do one which would be a male. They're all women that have come to me that have either lost their immigration status or have precarious immigration status, and they're in a relationship with a Canadian, be it a Canadian citizen or a PR, and that person is not sponsoring or saying they're going to sponsor them under a spousal application, and they're in an abusive relationship. So it's helping them get their own status by way of a humanitarian application and get away from an unsafe situation. And so those are usually the type of people I end up representing. I mean, I do other aspects of immigration law. For example, if someone has been denied an application and it needs to be appealed next level, so federal court applications, they may have need to go in front of the Immigration Appeal Division. I used to do a lot more, a little bit less now, but still doing duty counsel for detained individuals. So that's sort of, I guess, the portfolio that I deal with.
Wow. So there's a lot of stories, people's stories involved here that can go quite deep. And I would imagine the stories of the clients that you work with. You would have a lot of empathy for their situation, yet having to really stay in this professional space to get your job done and accomplish what you need to. Do you find that challenging at times?
It's interesting. I think my journey there, I mean, we've got a label now for the type of work that I do, which is trauma-informed lawyering. That's sort of what is used in a number of professions that deal with vulnerable people who have gone through trauma, who have been victimized, who've been persecuted. When I first started out and I did refugee work, you're out of law school and you're like, I am a lawyer. I have to be stoic and I'm going to be tough. And you keep those emotions buried, so tell me what's happened to you. And you're taking the narrative and you're filling the forms and you're preparing them and representing them and being this tough lawyer that you have in your mind you're supposed to be. But over the years, that's not who I am. It's, okay, how can I make this a safe place for you where you can start to share with me what I need to have to do your application? It's really becoming in tune with the person in front of me and making sure I'm not, triggering them or re-traumatizing them, and being very sensitive of that. For example, I had one client, it took me just a number of months, and even though I was a female lawyer, for her to get comfortable enough with me to agree to go see a psychologist who would help support her as she told a very difficult narrative, a very brutal narrative that she went through in her home country. But it took many months. And I'm not sure if, as a young lawyer, if I would have understood that I needed to be patient, and you just can't sit down and expect them to give their narrative to you. You've got to be patient. So, but you're not a counselor either. And you've got to remember that as a lawyer, you're not a counselor. And you've got to link them up with the resources that they need while they're engaging in the process with you.
Yes, and wow, that would be challenging. Do you feel, Kamaljit, as though these types of requests from women who are in distress in the immigration space have increased over the past several years, or has it stayed steady? Has it stayed the same?
It's hard to say because I think for quite a while there was women in these situations, if they were in a relationship with a Canadian or PR and it was abusive, were reluctant to come out because of fear of being deported. Because if they came out and they had no status,
right,
the process they would have to engage in, which is the humanitarian application, would take years. Getting a temporary resident permit could take, a long time as well. Because there was so much uncertainty, many chose to stay. So I think it's difficult to gauge whether things have really changed. There is a regular need for individuals to have lawyers with this situation. We now have clinics that are offering services to victims of violence. So I don't necessarily think it's increased, but the comfort that people are getting from knowing that they're not just going to be removed. Because it used to be, and we did a whole project. I was a supervising lawyer for the Ending Violence Association of BC. It was a 3-year project in 2009. And we did focus groups across BC to look at the barriers that immigrant women face. And some of the stories we heard was a woman would call the police for help. The police officer would discover she had no status, report her to CBSA. CBSA would then start removals.
Yeah.
And even back east, we had
Oh
heard
no.
of, this was over 10 years ago, I think it's changed, that CBSA officers were going into transition homes to,
Mm.
take women that were without status.
Okay.
So I, with advocacy that happened over the years, and we do have now expedited processes, we also have a policy that says CBSA is to halt removals until these individuals have the opportunity to complete their applications for temporary stay or permanent stay. So I think there's just knowing that they're not just going to be immediately removed has given individuals reassurance that they can leave the abusive relationship, can engage a lawyer to help them. So that's a long way of answering your questions because it's not cut and dry.
Yes, that makes sense. I understand. So there, really likely have been many women
Yes.
who are in the shadows and now kind of, feel more comfortable coming forward. Okay. I want to ask you a question about you as a professional, as a South Asian woman. I'm clearly a Caucasian woman, and I've had my own challenges just as a woman owning my own business. But being both a woman and a minority, have you ever felt as though you have had to work harder to prove yourself in the field, and have you faced challenges in this sense, or has this not been your experience?
Gosh, no, there was I often felt like a misfit. Like I just didn't fit in some of the places that I would go. In my early years, I would get misidentified as an interpreter or as a court reporter, but not as a lawyer. So even if I'm
Wow.
bringing in my, I think my dad bought me a big lawyer briefcase. So even if I had that, it still didn't make sense. And I looked younger than my age, so I'd bought these. My husband bought them these glasses, which I didn't need at that time. Now I do for reading, but I didn't need. I would wear them just to look older. But I think that's for all women, so not necessarily to do with race, but definitely um, had experienced interesting encounters where the first impression was that I couldn't be the lawyer. I remember going to a discovery early on in my career against a really senior counsel. And I was intimidated, but I wasn't going to let him know. And I had to go do a discovery at his office. It's a big firm. And he's like, takes me to the boardroom and says, have a seat. I said, no, I don't need to sit. I knew I'd lose my authority if I sat. So I just,
Yeah.
and I said, no, I'm fine standing. And we continued the discussion. But again, that could be any woman that he would do that with, not necessarily just because I'm racialized. But I do remember being appointed to a board and one of my colleagues saying, oh, it must have been easier for you to get this position because you are a woman and racialized.
Right.
Then I started to second guess myself. Geez, was that the reason why I was appointed? Not my degree and not my knowledge in this area? You start to question yourself. But then when
Yes.
I was reappointed a number of times again, and I was on this board for over 10 years, and you're like, okay, yeah, no, it wasn't because of my skin color or me being a woman. So interesting things like that. And just like I said, I felt many times like the first firm I was at, they were great people, but I did feel out of place. I remember going to a baseball game and people are buying drinks. Well, in my culture, that's not something we do when we socialize. We didn't go to baseball games and I don't drink. My dad doesn't drink. So you just felt awkward at this. Like if you gave me a cup of chai, it'd be, oh yeah, I get this. Let's sit down and talk. But it just felt out of my element. But I was
Yeah.
fortunate as well. There was two female lawyers. They were Caucasian that I met in my first year, and one of whom became a really close friend. We co-mentored each other, and she was sadly she passed away last year, but she was an amazing support throughout my career. And she would nudge me and say, "Oh, Kamaljit, if you want something, go for it. Go put your name forward." So I was really fortunate that way as well.
Yes, mentors. That's amazing. Mentors often make all the difference. I think we've discussed this once before, but my husband is from the Dominican Republic, and we went through quite an experience to get him here to Canada. And I was 6.5 months pregnant with our first child when he finally did arrive. He came on a student visa and did study here in British Columbia. But it's definitely a space where I can see that people are relying on you. I remember, calling our immigration consultant daily and what can we do? Are there any updates? Or, it was just, so I'm just wondering, it's a lot of pressure. People relying on you for, where they are going to live. Perhaps they're living in a place of danger. And, as a person clearly with a lot of empathy for others, it must wear on you at times. I'm wondering kind of how you manage that, and is that the case?
There's, it can be tough. It does wear on you. I remember a young girl, and she lets me talk about her situation. She was in an abusive situation, and there was a removal order because her family had forced her to work and then reported her for working without a work permit. So she was arrested, and there was a removal order. And I had to sit with her and say, we have some other pathways for you. You're educated, you've got skills. We can look at a number of pathways, but the best thing for you right now, for a number of reasons, is going to be to leave Canada for a bit. And it was hard for her, but we got her back within a year. But it's hard when she was a victim in all of this, and she was manipulated. But for her well-being as well, her father and mom were back home. They could support her, whereas here she was alone as well. And if she didn't go, then she's in violation, and that would be another, I guess, black mark on being able to bring her back. So sometimes you have to have difficult discussions with clients, and sometimes there is no pathway left. And we've tried, and I remember trying with one client. We tried all levels of appeals. It was a refugee claimant, lovely family, and it wasn't successful. And then we even tried stay at federal court, which we did get because there was some urgency. Something had happened that their lives may be at risk. Ultimately, they had to go back. I remember going to their place and saying goodbye to them, giving their daughters a little gift because I felt so bad. But to this date, that must have been 12 years ago. Every year that client reaches out to me to say Happy New Year or Happy Thanksgiving, because he knew that I did the best fight I could on their behalf. And I made sure that their return was supported in a way that they would be safe there, that there was not going to be a risk to the best of my ability. But it's hard. It's hard on you as a lawyer because you worry. When I remember doing that stay application and putting every ounce of me in it and then coming home and just collapsing in bed because you're done.
I can't even imagine. It actually leads me to my next question, Kamaljit, which is, how do you take care of your mental health when things, when working on cases such as these, it can be quite heavy and wear on you emotionally? How do you manage that?
I think I've gotten better over time. And I think as a profession, we've started to talk more openly about mental health because, again, you come out of law school and I think especially back then, you're going to be this litigator or advocate or whatever and stand up for your client and be strong and stoic, right? And all the whatever movies or whatever you see on TV sort of portray that lawyer image, never a real soft side to the lawyer, right? For God forbid. So I think it's better now because I think mental health and wellness is a topic in law school. If not in law school, definitely the Law Society, and they're doing wellness. Even the CBA National Immigration, we are forming a mental health and wellness standing committee. And we'll be doing a panel at our conference. Hopefully in June, we'll have a panel. If not, we'll have the standing committee that's going to be supporting our members. But personally for myself, what I've done is I've done a check-in with myself when I'm feeling that just taking another one is going to be too much for me. That, it's like when they say when you're on the plane put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your children.
Yes.
Same thing. If I'm not in a good space, I'm not going to be able to do my best job for the client. So I have a number of colleagues that I know do the work I do. So there's a referral mechanism that I can send out when I'm not able to do it. Or if I'm on a file and it's deep, I have some lawyer lifelines, again, colleagues, where I'll call and say, do you have capacity to hear? Because you don't want to trigger them either if they've got the heavy files. And then so I've got that. I've learned to say no when I just can't. And then just other things, daily exercise, having outlets, girlfriends and friends, that sister circle is good. Just,
Yes.
yeah, and family, right? Just being with family. So it's just trying to figure out a way. And I've started to practice, like I do mediation work as well, which I find gives me an end in sight. So if I'm hired by someone, there's a beginning and end. It's not
Yes.
one of these immigration files that just has a never-ending song, just keeps on going. So that gives me some satisfaction. It's like, okay, I'm going to go in for a day. I'm going to try and help people resolve their dispute. And if it does, that's excellent. If it doesn't, but we get them on the path to talking and moving in that direction. I always leave feeling better. So I have that other little part that I do that allows me to sort of, I don't know, keep myself a bit,
Balanced.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We only think of, often first responders or veterans when it comes to that really heavy emotional work. It can actually result in PTSD and other mental health challenges. But, this type of work that you're doing with people, not just files, people can be quite heavy emotionally when you're so invested in a client's case. And I would imagine that, it could be definitely something that you have to, be aware of and check in with yourself, as you say, now and again, for sure.
Other language to describe that vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue is another one where you're just exhausted in hearing the stories. Not that you're not believing, but you're just worn out, like you can't give anymore.
Compassion fatigue. I had never heard that term. That is a great way to describe it. And I would imagine it's relevant in various professions, and especially yours. It makes a lot of sense.
Only so much we can give, right?
Yes. Often we overextend ourselves. It's that, as you referenced, being able to say no and knowing when it's time to say no. So, further into your work and your dedication to so many people in this country and beyond, you've been actively involved in policy reform as well, which is a challenging thing to do. I look forward to hearing more about that. Advocacy for immigrant women who are victims of intimate partner violence, which you've spoken to. But in addition to that, can you tell me a bit more about the policy reform piece and why this is a passion for you? Why you've kind of taken this on in addition to just simply working these cases and clocking out for the day?
So, as we sort of touched upon, you asked me the question about has there been an increase in a number of these type of cases? Really, I think, we've already talked about that, but I guess my interest in doing the policy piece was that there seemed to be these gaps and barriers for women fleeing violence. And I saw an immigration system that had an economic pathway where back in the day, the way it worked was that if a province needed someone on an expedited basis because they were bringing some economic skills of urgent need in the province, you would put a green sticker on the envelope, and that would alert the officer to pull it out and fast track it. So I thought, okay, why can't we do something similar for victims of violence? Put on a different color sticker. We already have temporary resident permits that can give an individual who may be out of status, but why can't we expedite it? we already have a humanitarian application, but it's taking 2 to 3 years. So why can't we expedite it by putting a different color sticker on it so that these victims can leave these unsafe, abusive, high-risk situations and just start to stand on their feet and have stability again. So that was a 10-year discourse. And again, it started with the project that I did with Eva BC. And, they were a big champion with me in going to meetings and advocating for this. We flew to Ottawa one time, met with the Minister of Immigration, probably 2009, 2010, back then to discuss this and put our ask forward. And I kept on going because it's so important to me and it was a solution that they could easily do if they wanted.
Yes.
So then it was 2019. I think was having discussions. I was fortunate to gain a seat at the policy table to talk about this. And I was asked, instead of a sticker, well, how else, is there a coding you would recommend? So I had recommended EFV, expedited family violence. So they took the FV. So all of these family violence cases in immigration for TRPs and agencies are coded FV. So that was my 10-year policy reform. Took 10 years, but it's done. But, I'm happy to report, again, I still have a seat at the table. They do listen to what I have to say, and they've been great in trying to tweak things if I see something on the ground or I hear from colleagues that there's been issues. So it was, I guess, resilient work, right? You have to keep at it and not let it go. But it was rewarding at the end to see that there's been hundreds of applications that have benefited from this. So, yeah.
Wow, congratulations, Kamalji. That's such a huge accomplishment, and thank you for sticking with it when it would have been easy after the first 4, 5, 6 years to throw in the towel, and how many lives this has and will continue to affect. So thank you and congratulations. What an accomplishment.
We're lucky, like I said, Eva BC was a champion beside me, and there was other stakeholders out there also saying that the system is not working for victims of violence.
Wow.
I'm not the sole crusader, I'd never say that, but I have my little bit, which was the coding on there.
Well, if everyone does their small part, and in this case, I would hardly call it a small part, then we see huge changes.
Thank you.
So
Yeah, definitely. So in 2019, Kamalji, you were recognized by your peers in British Columbia for your work on equality and diversity. And in 2021, you were recognized for your work on the CBA National Immigration Anti-Racism Committee. Can you speak more to this and why your passion for focus on diversity?
I think it's not just our organization and it's not just me. I think the whole world, when George Floyd happened, really stopped, paused, and said, we need to change how we're doing things. We need to be mindful of ensuring that we're not just speaking the words of diversity and inclusion, but we're actually ensuring people have a voice, that we're actually inviting them to the table to engage in a meaningful way. What I can say from the CBA, what has been done at the CBA immigration section, it just launched. We launched a speakers registry, which took a couple of years to get that off the ground, but it's a simple, I would say, simple tool that's been formatted, and I wasn't actively involved in that. Someone else was on the committee, but what it involved was ensuring that when we have conferences or webinars, that we make space for people who may not normally have been considered. So it's a registry where you can register yourself and say, hey, I've got some knowledge on this topic, and if there's an opportunity, I'd like to present or write an article or whatever. And it also is encouraging people to nominate people, because again, you've got to remember culturally, for example, in my culture, as a woman, young girl, don't talk too much, sit down quietly. And then I go into profession where you're supposed to be bold and confident, da, da, da. So I had a lot of rejigging to do in my mind because I was raised culturally a different way. So I wouldn't be the one to say, hey, can I be a speaker? I wouldn't be putting my hand up.
Right.
Again, I was fortunate that I had mentors, even at Options, some brilliant board of directors that nudged and pushed me all the way to chair. And I'll call him out. Tim Beachy was one of them. Like, he just like, Kamalji, you're chair of governance now. Kamalji, you're
Mhm.
vice chair. Kamalji, you're chair. So, if you have people behind you, it makes it easier. But if you don't, then it's harder to put your hand up. So that was sort of the intent behind the registry, was that we would get more diverse people putting their names forward
Mhm.
to then be able to present and just be given opportunities they may not otherwise have had.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
simple thing. And I think one of the other things that was done by a number of people on that committee was name pronunciation,
Okay.
was to encourage the courts, and I think the courts have adopted it, a policy where people, they either ask or how to pronounce a name. You can imagine if you're, I always get confusion with my name, but it's funny, some Caucasian names I have difficulty with. Well, how do you pronounce that, right? But
Yes.
it's, if you want to make someone feel included, I think it starts with knowing how to say their name.
Yes.
I remember an ICBC case with a adjuster. I was representing a client at a settlement mediation, and the adjuster said, I can't pronounce your client's name, can I shorten it? I go, sure. If I don't know what his name was, let's say it was Jason. I said, oh, maybe, okay, sure, you can shorten it if we can call you Jason Jeet then, or Jason Jatinder, and then he got it. Just take the time to learn someone's name and show
Yes.
them that you respect them. And I think we have those some of these bare minimums that'll go a long way.
That's such a good point, Kamaljeet. I think that someone's name is really a huge part of their identity and who they are, and respecting that and taking the time to pronounce someone's name properly is important, especially when you're in the middle of a legal procedure, a legal case that you may already be feeling vulnerable. So yeah, I had never thought of that. Now, is this in the courts when it comes to lawyers, judges, um, when it comes to name pronunciation within the legal process?
I believe it's in the federal courts,
Okay.
and I'm not sure about the provincial. And we did encourage the tribunals, the immigration tribunals, to adopt that practice. I'm not
Okay.
exactly sure where that stands, but I think it's also incumbent upon us as well, if
Yes, for sure.
to value ourselves and say, my name is Kamaljeet, pronounced Kamaljeet, rhymes with whatever if you want to make it easier, or Lehal. And to,
Right.
if someone says it incorrectly, actually the pronunciation is like, be proud of our name and take ownership over it.
Mhm.
I think we have a role to play as well.
For sure. I have to admit, my husband's last name and my children is Araujo, as a Spanish name. He's from the Dominican Republic, and I haven't changed my name. And I think part of that is that I feared that people would have trouble pronouncing it. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that now, because when my children reference their last name, and no one at school or a teacher being able to pronounce it, I just encourage them to, kindly correct them and teach them how to say it properly. And I really do need to take my own advice there, and change the name that I want to have, my family name, the same name as my children and my husband, and and when people don't know how to pronounce it, just clarify it for them. So yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So I want to switch gears a little bit to some timely issues. British Columbia and across Canada, we have an incredibly diverse population. And many Canadians are struggling with what they thought was the Canadian dream, new Canadians. You know, it's not the experience they thought it would be when they planned to come to Canada. And also, you know, visible minorities who have grown up here are struggling, and there are, you know, are cases in the news, whether it be physical violence or verbal attacks. Can you speak a little bit to what you've observed, Kamaljit? And then, you know, I'd like to dig a little deeper into this and kind of see where we are as a country.
So I'm not sure if this is going to answer your question exactly, but I'll just give you a sense of what I'm seeing in the Canada today that I'm seeing.
Yes, please.
I'm distressed by a number of things. I think primarily the way in the world of immigration, it seems like everything is just gone upside down. We're in an upside down world where nothing makes sense anymore. As a lawyer, you know, it's hard to even give advice to clients. Something that was a pathway one day is now shut down, and it's frustrating to be able to give advice in that context. You feel for your clients and you're scrambling. We just got an announcement, I think it was a Tuesday, about open work permits for spouses, and there's a whole bunch of changes coming there, and not everyone is going to be able to access that open work permit. So if you have a spouse here on a study permit and work permit, it used to be that they could apply, the other spouse could apply for an open work permit. So there's changes there now such that, and those changes will take effect next Tuesday. That's how fast it's happening, where certain individuals will no longer be able to access that ability to get an open work permit. It troubles me when we have these kind of changes happening so rapidly and there's been no consultation, and it's having profound impacts on people's lives who are here on temporary status and thought they were going to be working towards achieving permanent residence in Canada. With respect to the students, there was a campaign, and I believe the Canadian slogan campaign was study, work, and stay. So they were under the impression, even though we hear, well, no, students were never allowed to be permanent residents, they're here to study, and that's it. But if you have campaigns like that, which were meant to bolster $1 billion industry, and you take no accountability over now rapidly changing it and saying, oh, the sky is falling, we have too many students, our housing is insufficient, prices are too high, and everything, all immigrants are now the scapegoats. And it's scary, and it reminds me of when we immigrated to Canada in the 70s. I remember my high school had KKK on it. And well, that's really bizarre. And my dad was downtown, and he's an educated man. He's a draftsman from England, used to draw world maps. He was looking for a job when he came to Canada, and I went downtown with him in the 70s. He was going to offices, giving his resume, and some white businessmen said, go home. He wears a turban, go back home. And then my brother at that point, this was all in the 70s, was attacked because he wore a turban, and my uncle made the decision to cut his hair. So what's happening now is reminding me for some reason of what happened way back then, because we heard, I think it was just last month, a South Asian boy killed in Edmonton, a student. Just very disgusting verbal exchanges with immigrants. People all seem to be emboldened to say the most horrible things. And those that have color on their skin are the targets, it seems. And it's scary times. And what troubles me is when you have laws that are changing so fast, it's reinforcing and fueling this anti-immigrant narrative. And so, yeah, it's difficult times, and my sort of mandate, personal mandate, and if I'm going to use whatever channel I can, my allies such as Options and other organization, is to say what the real facts are.
Yes.
Immigrants bring value to this country.
Yes.
Without immigrants, we're going to be a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Should there have been better measures in place? For sure. Fraud was rampant because, again, it's $1 billion industry. So did people turn a blind eye to what was really happening? LMIAs are being sold. That's, so, but when it was good, it was good. And when, for example, students were needed and they, we were in a pandemic and, thanks for being at the front line for us and putting your lives on the line. But now we don't need you. So go.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I said, it's an upside down world right now, it seems.
Yes, it's especially disturbing. I mean, as humans, we seem to not learn from history, and that's when it becomes especially concerning. I mean, the 1970s, it might sound like a long time ago, but it wasn't. And, so many parts of our history are, the dark moments, dark is an understatement when it comes to how people in this country were treated, people of color, indigenous peoples, etc. I mean, these are lessons that our generation and the generations that are out in society today should have learned. And, do you think that this is, I don't want to get into a debate about Donald Trump or, some of that kind of thinking and way of politics that's kind of coming over from the United States. But do you think that that has any effect, kind of bringing people where they may have been in the shadows with these kind of dark thoughts or views coming out more into the open and influencing what's happening?
It does influence.
Mm-hmm.
Like you've said, people have become emboldened. When the pandemic happened and the truckers convoy and that, it was a very similar to pattern to what was going on in the States as well, with some of the noise that was being made there and people feeling like, the insurgents that happened there and disruption to democracies. You're seeing a similar thing in Ottawa. So, I think there is an influence. People are in tune with what's happening there, but it goes beyond America. You look at Europe and other countries, we see the same or similar discourse, anti-immigration discourse in other countries as well. So
Very
I
true.
think it's a worldwide phenomenon. I think we're in some bizarre times, the conflict, the hate, the vitriol. It's sad to see, but
Mm-hmm.
I still believe most people at their core are decent people and they want to do the right thing. And we just got to remind ourselves of what are the true values of being a Canadian. It's not the color of your skin.
Mm-hmm.
It should be that we are an inclusive country, that every one of us was immigrants. If we say
Yes.
otherwise, we're, we're not understanding history.
No.
We say otherwise. We're all,
Yes.
and yes, there's dark, very dark chapters to Canada and how it was formed. And I think we need to remember that as we continue to move forward and acknowledge that. But again, I think most people want to do the right thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes how things are presented in media, and we've got so many platforms for media now, right? And then the algorithms are like, whatever you like, you're going to keep getting that sort of information coming into your feed. And if that's all you're hearing is negative stories, I think it'll influence you even if you're a good person. So that's where I want to start to change that narrative to showcase the reality and the good things that immigrants bring.
Yes, I mean, I think that storytelling can be a big part of that personally. Obviously, I'm passionate about storytelling given what I do, but I really think that telling the stories of immigrants who have come to Canada, the amazing things that they're doing, what they contribute to the fabric of our country, of our province, and so that people who are kind of have this stereotype or this misconception via sensationalized news or just peers around them who are speaking in ways that are prejudiced or racist, that they can really see the true stories behind these amazing Canadians who are Canadians wherever they may be from. We weren't educated as we should be, my generation, probably yours as well, about Indigenous peoples in school, for example, but that's certainly no excuse, and we have to learn now and ask the questions. It's an effort that's really important to me, to learn about, all Indigenous nations, as many as I can, and as many facts and parts of history and their culture as I can. So the learning piece and storytelling, I think can make a difference and can, help to switch this narrative and redirect it into the way in which it should be, which is in essence truth.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think storytelling is very powerful, and I think truthful campaigns and connecting with allies who are going to help share the truth about the value and the benefits we get from immigrants to Canada.
Yeah, I was just going to mention to you, with my biracial family, we've experienced an unfortunate and surprising amount of racism here in British Columbia. Not myself personally, but my children and my husband. Either at school, the children have, my husband out in, retail stores. As an adult, he's experienced that, and we've spent some time in the States. Recently, we were there for 3 weeks, and prior to that, had spent a couple of weeks there, and we've never experienced that racism there. Now, of course, it's hard to compare because we don't live there, but I think Canadians often have this perspective that we don't. That's all south of the border, and that's not something that happens here in Canada. And that's, I know firsthand that it does happen here, as you've described. We can't think that we're above that.
Glad to hear. Yeah, no, but that's true. We need to do a real check-in with ourselves as well.
Kamaljit, you often present on topics including ethics, conflict resolution, being both a certified civil and family mediator as well as a qualified arbitrator, which you'd mentioned previously. What do you think would surprise the average person about family and things you see in your line of work? So, what things, I know that there's not kind of an average case, but what do you think might surprise people, kind of make them look at some things differently, or to watch within their own family dynamic when it comes to mediation in the family space?
The ethics part is more of a lawyer's responsibility to proceed ethically in their cases, and that's whether it's family or anything. And part of that is how you interact with your opposing counsel. In court, when you refer to opposing counsel, you call them my friend. Yeah, so it's not, you're adversarial, but you're still part of the same profession, and you're supposed to be respectful to one another, and proceed in a way that is not attacking the other person, is not unprofessional. So those are like some of the basic tenets of being a lawyer. So that the ethics part with respect to the legal profession is more that behaving in a way, like family cases sometimes, and that's the reason one of the reasons I've never practiced it, but I'll mediate it, is they become, I think it's one of the most, next to estate litigation, one of the most emotionally laden, high conflict areas. And what's sad to see is when you have children involved and the parents really aren't working in the best interest of the children, right?
Mm.
Which is the fundamental principle in family law, right? And decisions made by courts are done on the basis of what's in the best interest of the child. And you look at some of the cases that you see, the high conflict ones, and it's like you are doing so much damage to your children by litigating the way you are. And yeah, I don't know if people would be surprised by that. I think most people know high conflict people are like that. When I do mediations, I mean, I do remind people that you are role models for your children. And even though you no longer want to be together, that doesn't mean that doesn't, you can't step away from your responsibilities towards your children. You're tied for life raising these children. But that doesn't mean you cannot have a respectful relationship, especially in front of the children, so that they see, okay, so our parents are no longer together, but they're raising us with our interests in mind and they're respectful to one another. So, that would be my hope. Having 4 children myself is that your children are your everything.
Mhm.
Got to make them your priority and act in a way that doesn't sabotage their future.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree there. And I've seen cases of this with, family and friends myself, and that would be challenging to be a part of. I'm not surprised to hear that you counsel the way that you do to your clients, reminding them that they are an example to their children. There's times when just in everyday life I have to stop myself and think, how am I going to pursue this conversation, whether it be a debate that I'm having with my husband, not a fight but a debate, or something along those lines, because I know that my children's ears are wide open. They're listening and they're absorbing like sponges. And when they reacting to what they might tell me, how am I going to react in a way that is teaching them kindness and empathy and understanding, taking a careful inventory of how I'm communicating in their presence,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to do that for people.
Yeah. So your role with Options Community Services KMLG, you were chair of the board for Options Community Services. For how long was it, KMLG?
4 years, but I was on the board. I was expecting with my first child when I joined the board in 96.
Wow.
So
So quite some time.
28, he turned 28, yeah. So I've been a long time, so 4 years as chair. It's an amazing organization. You mentioned it's one of your favorites. It is my favorite. My very first job was as a childcare worker with Options.
Oh, wow.
Then I came back years later. I was invited to be on the board.
Okay.
And I've kind of it just seems to be one of those, like Hotel California, you just stay, you don't go.
Yes. And the culture of their team, I actually just met with them last week. And their leadership team, they're just such wonderful people. I went into a meeting there once and wasn't my best that day. There were some things happening within my personal life, and they noticed right away. That's just how they are. They're people who, the leadership team, they have such kindness, and it's authentic kindness. There's many organizations doing great things in the community, many, but Options. What do you believe sets them apart from others, KMLG?
We're a grassroots. Like when I joined as a childcare worker, it was a little office above, I think it was called the Robin Hood Pub on 72 Avenue. It was a little office there. So it grew with the community. I always describe it as Options has its fingers on the pulse of the community. It knows what it needs, and it's grown from that little organization to, I think we have over 80 programs now, over 600 employees, over 400 volunteers. It's not just happened in the last year or so. It's been growing as our community has grown, and it understands what it needs. As the community's changed, it's done a number of rethinks to how do we now go about serving this need in the community. Like, it's very, it does a lot of these reflections. The board has they call it a retreat. It's a meeting over the weekend where we do strategic thinking. We have that coming up this weekend where we just sit and talk and make sure our long-term plan and vision for options in our community is actually going to benefit the community and stays still as we grow, aligned with our core values. So
Yeah.
it's a brilliant organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always found that, options where there's a gap and some organizations may say there's just no way, options always seems to find a way. They will, move mountains and overturn heavy rocks in order to help someone.
They do. They do. And then, we had Ginny come on board and help us with these campaigns of 50 Women of Options. And it's just like, that's brilliant. It's amazing. It really, and it was a part of 2 of those campaigns. And it was so inspiring to have women come forward from all different backgrounds to raise these monies for housing and youth, the Game Changer Fund. So they've done some really innovative fundraising approaches, which wasn't our strongest suit before. So, and I'm happy to say that some amazing things are happening there. Again, Christine, Jenny, and Tammy, all of those people at the front doing great work.
I'll include a link below for Options Community Services, a nonprofit that, to be transparent, I work with, but that I just have such great respect for. Now, Kamaljit, if you were not working in law, what do you think you would be doing? I know that you're very vocal, strong, clearly very intelligent and kind. Would you ever consider politics?
Thanks, but no.
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 Why not?
No, it's just, why not? I just don't see myself as a politician. I'd rather be engaged in other ways to make systemic change.
Yeah.
Um,
That's more effective.
yeah. And if I had another job, it would be something to do with traveling. I love traveling.
Mhm.
Traveling lawyer somehow around the world. That would be great.
Well, you never know. I know you could make it happen. I want to return for the last couple of questions here, Kamaljit. The Canadian political landscape, quite uncertain. Trudeau's recent announcement, and we have no idea kind of where the country will be politically. Conservative, liberal, who will be leading. And do you have concerns as to what this may mean for new Canadians, especially women, international students, minorities who are living here, potentially all Canadians really, but focusing more on minorities and the concerns that you've identified regarding, this prejudice and, racist behavior that can become obviously hurtful, but even violent. Do you think this will, increase based on how the political landscape changes in the days, weeks, and months to come?
Yeah. Again, disturbing, troubling trends. It's, I'm currently chair of the CBA National Immigration Section, and it seems daunting right now, holding the reins there, because we don't have a prime minister really right now. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few months. There will be an election called. So there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's, again, I think I said at the beginning, it's a frustrating time to be a lawyer in this area because there's so many moving parts and it's hard to advise clients. And it is immigrant people that are getting the brunt of it. Immigrants, people trying to immigrate to Canada. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about it. It's disappointing, but that doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. That's where that flip the script, change the narrative, get the real facts out there is important. Collaborating with allies to ensure that the real benefit of immigrants is understood. And I think if
Yes.
we take that approach and certainly not give in or give up, but just become very strategic in challenging these myths and figure out a way to debunk them.
Like when people,
Yeah,
regardless of,
regardless of who is at the helm, politically.
yes.
I think if we are able to get accurate messaging out there, most Canadians would see the benefit of immigrants to Canada.
I agree. I think, saying the word immigrant, it kind of, people kind of think of it as a term, and they don't always put a face and a person to that individual, their hopes, their dreams. When you show that real human being, a 23-year-old woman who has dreams and has an application in, and maybe is expecting a baby, is coming from a country where she may be at risk of at risk for violence. It's dangerous for her to stay there. And really putting all of those facts about this woman's story or man's story or child's story. This was her favorite toy as a child. This is what she thinks of Canada and why she wants to be here and what she loves about the idea of living in Canada. Telling the true story. I think when you kind of, sometimes it becomes that immigrants are almost dehumanized in a way, and that's when things maybe become dangerous.
Back to what you were saying about storytelling, right?
Yeah. I
Using
suppose
these
it does.
campaigns to tell the stories.
Yeah.
People who have come here and contributed successfully and helped and again stood up on the front lines for us during the pandemic. Right. I think it's reminding people of the contributions of very real people to Canada.
Yeah.
Did use the word immigrant, but you're right. That just sort of takes away, desensitizes people to the whole situation. They're not able to relate to people, to these individuals in a real meaningful way. Then it's easier to dismiss them.
Yes. Kamaljit, there's so many other questions I'd love to ask you, but I know I can't keep you all day. I know that we've spoken about Options Community Services. I ask every client this at the end of our discussion. If you could choose one or two nonprofits that you're really passionate about, that you'd like people to hear about and know about, what would those nonprofits be?
It's BC Children's Hospital.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Options and BC Children's Foundation. I don't repeat Options again, but children's. I mean, children are, I think whatever we can do to help children that are sick and in hospital, I think whatever fundraising the foundation does, I think it's great.
Excellent. Okay. I will make sure to link to BC Children's Hospital below, as well as Options, of course. Thank you so much, Kamaljit. Your time is so valuable. Your expertise, you have so much insight. I think you've been able to share with the listeners information that is just so very valuable. And this dialogue and keeping it going when it comes to minorities and new Canadians, and really, standing up when someone is saying something inappropriate and setting the tone that that's not okay. But I would love to have you on again at some point, and hopefully we'll be talking about programs and initiatives that have been put in place and a much better landscape for new Canadians, because we do live in a great country, and I would love for things to change, and I want to be a part of the work that you're doing such a great job at, and others are in setting the narrative and setting the stage for a great place for new Canadians to live. So thank you so much, Kamaljit, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It's been really nice talking to you. You and I sat, I think, a few months ago, and time just flew.
Thank you so much, Kamaljit. It's been a true honor. Thank
So be kind and truly connect. You are listening to Rachel Thexton Connects.